Dr. James Mitchell had been practicing veterinary medicine in rural Montana for over 15 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what walked through his clinic door that Tuesday morning. "Morning, Doc," said Ethan Cooper, a local rancher who lived on the outskirts of Pinewood Valley. What made Dr. Mitchell freeze wasn't Ethan himself. It was the animal perched comfortably on his shoulder, occasionally nuzzling against his weathered face. "Ethan," Dr. Mitchell said slowly, keeping his voice steady as his receptionist Laura backed away toward the wall. "That's a bobcat on your shoulder." "Sure is," Ethan replied casually, as if carrying around a wild predator was perfectly normal. "This is Rusty. Found him when he was just a tiny thing, barely alive after a bad storm took out his mama last spring. He's been having some trouble with his paw, and I figured it was time for a checkup." The bobcat, a full-grown male with distinctive spotted fur and tufted ears, looked at Dr. Mitchell with piercing amber eyes. Then, to the vet's astonishment, the animal affectionately licked Ethan's cheek. "I know what you're thinking," Ethan continued, seeming to notice the shock on the vet's face. "It's not legal to keep a wild bobcat as a pet, but Rusty here is special. I've got all the permits from Fish and Wildlife. He was rehabilitated with the intention of release, but they determined he was too imprinted on humans to survive in the wild. I've got a special wildlife sanctuary license for the ranch." Dr. Mitchell exhaled slowly. In his years practicing in rural Montana, he'd seen people with unusual connections to wildlife, but this was different. The bobcat seemed genuinely bonded to Ethan in a way that defied conventional understanding of wild predators. "Let's get him into exam room 2, Doctor," Mitchell finally said, professional curiosity overcoming his initial shock. "I'll need to see those permits, though." As they walked to the exam room, Ethan explained how he'd found Rusty as a tiny kitten, eyes barely open, during a violent spring storm. The mother had been killed by a fallen tree, and the kitten was suffering from exposure and malnutrition. "I contacted the wildlife authorities right away," Ethan explained, as Dr. Mitchell carefully examined the bobcat's swollen front paw. "Followed all their protocols for rehabilitation, but Rusty here just never took to being wild. The rehab specialists said he had imprinted too strongly on humans, and releasing him would be a death sentence." Dr. Mitchell nodded as he gently felt along the bobcat's leg. Remarkably, the animal stayed calm, occasionally making chirping sounds but showing no signs of aggression. "Looks like he's got a minor infection from a puncture wound," Dr. Mitchell said. "Probably stepped on something sharp. I'll need to clean it, prescribe some antibiotics, and make sure there's nothing lodged in there." While preparing the treatment, Dr. Mitchell studied the unusual pair. Ethan, a solitary man in his 50s who had lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago, spoke to Rusty in quiet, gentle tones. The bobcat responded with an array of sounds, chirps, purrs, and soft growls that seemed like their own language. "He sleeps at the foot of my bed," Ethan said with a small smile. "Follows me around the ranch like a shadow. Still hunts for himself in the enclosed sanctuary area I built, but always comes back. Never thought I'd find this kind of companionship again after Marie passed." After treating the paw and verifying Ethan's wildlife sanctuary permits, which were indeed legitimate, Dr. Mitchell found himself fascinated by this extraordinary relationship. "I'd like to learn more about how you've managed this," he told Ethan. "Would you mind if I visited the ranch sometime? From a professional standpoint, this kind of successful rehabilitation arrangement is remarkable." Ethan nodded, scratching Rusty behind his tufted ears. "Door's always open, Doc. Could use some company now and then besides this fella." As they left the clinic, Dr. Mitchell watched through the window as Rusty rubbed his head against Ethan's beard, then leapt gracefully into the back of the pickup truck, settling into what appeared to be a custom-built enclosure. Dr. Mitchell shook his head in amazement. In all his years as a rural veterinarian, he'd never seen anything quite like it. A lonely man and a wild bobcat, somehow finding exactly what they both needed in each other's company. The following Saturday, Dr. Mitchell drove his truck along the winding dirt road leading to Ethan Cooper's ranch. The property sprawled across hundreds of acres at the foothills of the mountains, surrounded by dense pine forests and open meadows. As he pulled up to the rustic log cabin that served as Ethan's home, Dr. Mitchell noticed the impressive enclosure extending from one side of the property. Several acres of natural habitat surrounded by specialized fencing that rose at least 12 feet high with inward-facing overhangs to prevent climbing out. Ethan emerged from the cabin, Rusty trotting beside him like an oversized house cat. "Welcome to Cooper Ranch," Ethan said, extending his hand, or as the official paperwork calls it, Cooper Wildlife Sanctuary. Dr. Mitchell shook his hand, still marveling at how comfortably the wild bobcat moved around its human companion. "This is quite the setup you have here. Had to meet all the state and federal requirements," Ethan explained as they walked toward the enclosure. "Cost a pretty penny, but worth every cent. Come on, I'll show you around." As they toured the property, Dr. Mitchell learned that Ethan's sanctuary didn't just house Rusty. In a separate enclosure lived 2 orphaned deer that couldn't be released. And in another area, a one-winged golden eagle that Ethan had nursed back to health with help from wildlife rehabilitation experts. "Started with just Rusty," Ethan explained, as they watched the bobcat stalk through tall grass, practicing his hunting skills on field mice. "Then word got around that I had the facilities and the permits. Now the wildlife officers bring me special cases, animals that can't go back to the wild but deserve better than a concrete cage in some facility." Inside the cabin, Dr. Mitchell noticed the unusual modifications Ethan had made to accommodate his unique companion. There were sturdy wooden platforms mounted at different heights along the walls, allowing Rusty to climb and perch as he would in the wild. A specialized door led directly to the outdoor enclosure, giving the bobcat freedom to come and go. "He's free to be outside whenever he wants," Ethan said, pouring coffee for his guest. "But most nights he chooses to sleep inside, especially in winter." As they sat at the kitchen table, Rusty jumped onto a nearby platform and settled down to observe them, occasionally making the distinctive chirping sounds that bobcats use to communicate. "How did you learn to care for him properly?" Dr. Mitchell asked, fascinated by the arrangement. "Lots of research, regular consultations with wildlife experts, trial and error too," Ethan admitted. "I know it's not ideal. Best place for a wild animal is in the wild. But for Rusty, this was the only option besides euthanasia." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "You've created something special here, a true sanctuary." Ethan's eyes grew distant. "After Marie died, this place felt too empty, too quiet. Was thinking of selling, actually." He glanced at Rusty. "Then this little guy came along and suddenly I had a purpose again." As the afternoon progressed, Dr. Mitchell observed the careful balance Ethan maintained, providing care and companionship while still respecting Rusty's wild nature. He never treated the bobcat like a pet, never tried to make him something he wasn't. "Wildlife officer checks in monthly," Ethan explained as they walked the perimeter of the enclosure. "Make sure everything's up to code and that the animals are thriving. I keep detailed records of their diet, behavior, health, everything." When it was time for Dr. Mitchell to leave, he found himself reluctant to go. There was something peaceful about this unusual sanctuary and the quiet man who had created it. "You're welcome back anytime, Doc," Ethan said, standing in the doorway with Rusty at his feet. "Not many folks understand what I'm doing here." As Dr. Mitchell drove away, he reflected on the unexpected friendship he'd witnessed, a lonely man who had lost everything, and a wild creature who couldn't return to its natural home, somehow healing each other in ways that defied easy explanation. The Montana winter arrived early that year, bringing fierce winds and heavy snow by mid-November. Dr. Mitchell had visited Ethan's sanctuary several times since that first encounter, developing both a professional interest in the unique wildlife rehabilitation work and a genuine friendship with the solitary rancher. When the blizzard warnings went out across Pinewood Valley, Dr. Mitchell found himself concerned about Ethan and his unusual family of rescued wildlife. The forecast predicted 3 feet of snow and wind, gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Dangerous conditions, even for those accustomed to Montana's harsh winters. After battling treacherous roads to ensure his clinic was secure, Dr. Mitchell made a decision. He loaded his truck with emergency supplies, veterinary equipment, and enough food to last several days. then set out for Cooper Ranch before the worst of the storm hit. The normally 30-minute drive took over an hour as visibility decreased and snow accumulated on the roads. By the time he reached the long driveway leading to Ethan's cabin, his windshield wipers were struggling against the heavy snowfall. He found Ethan outside, securing additional reinforcements to the wildlife enclosures. "Doc, what the hell are you doing out in this?" Ethan shouted over the howling wind, his beard already crusted with ice. "Thought you might need a hand." Dr. Mitchell called back, grabbing supplies from his truck. "Where's Rusty?" "Inside. Already brought the Eagle in too. Can't risk the shelter collapsing with him in it." Together they worked for another hour, securing the property against the intensifying storm. They moved the 2 rescue deer into a reinforced barn structure and double-checked all enclosures before finally retreating to the warmth of the cabin. Inside, Dr. Mitchell found Rusty perched on his favorite platform, watching the storm through the window with alert eyes. In a large cage in the corner, the golden eagle ruffled its feathers, clearly displeased with the temporary indoor accommodations. "Didn't expect company for this one," Ethan said, hanging their snow-covered coats by the roaring fireplace, "but I'm glad for the help." As night fell, the storm intensified. The wind screamed around the cabin, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling in impenetrable white sheets. Despite the ferocity outside, inside was surprisingly peaceful, the fire crackling, Rusty occasionally chirping, and the 2 men sharing quiet conversation over hot coffee laced with whiskey. Around midnight, they were startled by a loud crack, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the entire cabin. "Tree down," Ethan said grimly, grabbing a flashlight. "And need to make sure it didn't hit any of the enclosures." Despite Dr. Mitchell's protests about the danger, they bundled up and ventured into the howling storm. The powerful beam of Ethan's flashlight revealed a massive pine had crashed down across one corner of the deer enclosure, severely damaging the fencing. "We need to check if they're still inside," Ethan shouted over the wind. "If they've escaped in this storm, they won't survive the night." Slogging through snow that reached past their knees, they forced their way to the damaged enclosure. To their relief, both deer were huddled in the far corner, frightened but unharmed. However, the damage to the fencing was severe. There was no way to secure it properly in these conditions. "We'll have to move them to the barn with additional reinforcements," Dr. Mitchell said, assessing the situation. "It's the only safe option." What followed was an exhausting battle against the elements. Leading frightened deer through a blizzard in the middle of the night was no easy task. But with patience and Ethan's remarkable way with animals, they managed to secure both deer in the barn, alongside additional food and water. By the time they stumbled back to the cabin, both men were exhausted and half frozen. To their surprise, Rusty was waiting anxiously by the door and immediately began inspecting them both as they entered, sniffing and making concerned sounds. "He was worried," Ethan said with a tired smile, as the bobcat rubbed against his legs. "Always knows when something's wrong." They shed their frozen outer layers and collapsed by the fire. Dr. Mitchell watched as Rusty settled protectively next to Ethan, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if keeping watch against the storm. "You know," Dr. Mitchell said thoughtfully, "in all my years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like what you've created here. Not just the sanctuary, but this connection you have with these animals, especially Rusty." Ethan nodded slowly, absently stroking the bobcat's spotted fur. "Marie always said I understood animals better than people. Guess she was right about that." He paused, looking into the fire. "After she died, I couldn't bear to be around folks much. Their pity was worse than the loneliness. But these creatures, they don't pity. They just accept you as you are." Deal. As the night deepened and the storm raged on, Dr. Mitchell reflected on the unexpected turn his life had taken since that day when Ethan walked into his clinic with a bobcat on his shoulder. He had found not just a fascinating professional case study, but a genuine friendship with both the solitary rancher and, remarkably, with the wild animals he had saved. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape buried under feet of pristine snow. The sunrise painted the white-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold, creating a breathtaking view from Ethan's windows. Standing together on the porch, coffee mugs steaming in the crisp air, they surveyed the damage. There would be repairs needed, trees to clear, and enclosures to rebuild. But the animals were safe. The cabin had weathered the storm, and somehow, in this remote corner of Montana, an unusual family had formed. A grieving man, a displaced bobcat, and now a country veterinarian who had discovered that healing sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms. As if understanding the moment, Rusty approached them both, first rubbing against Ethan's legs, then, for the first time, doing the same to Dr. Mitchell. The bobcat looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, then gently licked his hand before trotting off to explore the snow-covered landscape of his sanctuary. "Well, look at that," Ethan said with a genuine smile. "Seems like you're part of the family now, Doc." Dr. Mitchell nodded, a lump forming in his throat as he watched the bobcat leave perfect tracks across the pristine snow. In this unlikely place, with these unlikely companions, he had found something he hadn't realized he was missing, a sense of purpose and belonging that transcended ordinary understanding. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied, and together they turned to begin the work of rebuilding.